you begin to realize, okay, this isn't forever. This second pastor, they're actually an interim pastor. Maybe they'll stay for 25 years like the last guy did, but more than likely not. It really needs to shift from the personality of the leader into writing things down and having our unity comes around the things that we covenant around.
Welcome to the LeadingSmart Podcast, leading in real time. In a turn of events, Tim is actually in his home office in Chicago, Illinois, and I am in Nashville, Tennessee at a co-working space. Who knew?
Yes. I'm home, you're on the road. We have traded spots, traded jobs. I don't know, traded something.
Yeah, but I will be in your neck of the woods tonight, headed to
Tonight.
Chicago for the Global Leadership Summit, which we will both be at, representing LeadingSmart. And I'm so excited.
And this is your first time to go to the GLS, is that right?
Yeah, in Chicago. I mean, I've been to like what do you call it? A site location?
A simulcast location.
Simulcast location, but this will be the first time to be at the broadcast campus. So I am
Okay.
really excited to be there. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Tim, we're going to dive in today. We've been talking about boards because we're in a season of where boards have been on our mind a lot. We're going to tell more people about that at the end of our episode today, about why that's the case. And we have done a couple episodes around the shifts that boards have to make. But today we want to do a deep dive on 3 specific shifts that church boards need to make to go from a founding board to a governing board. So yeah, we've identified 3 and we want to go a little bit deeper on them. So Tim, the first one that we want to talk about, the shift from going from a founder board to a governing board is
before we go into that.
Yeah.
Are you okay? Can
Yes.
we
I'm not okay, but yes, you can go ahead.
I would love to talk about the why.
That's, Simon Sinek says we should start with the why. So let's
It's a
do that.
book. Yeah. No, like who cares? What is a founders board and why shift?
Good
What's-
point.
First of all, we should say there's nothing wrong with being a founder. Obviously, we work with scores of founding pastors specifically, but also there's nothing wrong with having a founders board. A founders board makes sense. Like when you start a church, a pastor starts a church, he or she doesn't know anyone often. They're coming in, they're just starting a church in a new community or community where that church hasn't been before, and they launch this church. And initially, they probably have a board of people, if they have a board at all, which they probably do because they have to if they're in the United States and have a 501c3. But it's probably pastor friends. It's probably people from afar. And then they start to build a church, and they have 68 people, and then 100 people, and then 200 people, and then they start tapping people that they know will support their vision because it's their vision. At this point, it's not the church's vision; it's their vision. And so it's like, come, here's where we're going. Here's the type of church we're going to be. Can you support this? Great. I need some advisors around me. I basically need to make sure I don't go off the rails. You're not going to be making huge decisions, but just I'm gonna run stuff by you. And that becomes a founder's board. It's surround myself with people who think like me, who are on their faith journey, who understand where we're going, and can make sure I don't do anything stupid. So 5, 10, 20, 25 years later, often, not always true, but often you still either have a founder's board that never changes, where a lot of those folks have been on there for a long time, or you have a founder board mentality, meaning maybe you have rotations at that point, but it's still pretty much just make sure I don't go off the rails. And, we'll plan a meeting when I need a meeting, and we might meet, a handful of times a year, but it's pretty much just like, hey, here's a decision. We already know what we're going to do. I just need you to give us a thumbs up and let's go.
Yeah.
Which I think works fine for a long time for a founder.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not sustainable often when because that founder then is 55, 60, 65 years old. They hand it off to the next person who's doesn't have as many reps, doesn't have as much experience, didn't start the church. And at that point, then it's like, how do we make sure this thing is sustainable for the long haul versus that it works for the founder? We've worked with churches who are either on the front end of that, I am the founder working with a church right now in Wisconsin that would be defined like this. He is the founder. He knows sometime in the next 10, 15 years that he's going to hand this church off to someone else, or they're going to find someone else, and he wants to make sure it's set up so it's sustainable for the next generation of leadership, not just because it works for him. Another church in Canada that is in that similar category as well. So anyway, that's
to you of a church that we just worked with in Missouri where it was going really well. He was actually, I think it was about 2 years following the founding pastor, who was still kind of around on a part-time basis and is super healthy, no tension between their relationship, but the structure of the founding board, he felt like was just bottlenecking the church's growth. And so that's an example of even the founding pastor who I met with that was a part of the process was like, yeah, I agree. Like it needs to change. I appreciate that you paused to anchor us in our why and also to say that like this, it's not a founding board is not a bad thing. I don't
Yeah.
know about you, Tim, but I'm thinking back to that example that I just shared. As I was asking the founding pastor, like, why did you initially set up the board in this way? And it was because he had come out of a very bureaucratic setting. And I think we find that a lot with more entrepreneurial
Yeah.
founding pastors. There's a reason why they're a founder because the Lord has put an entrepreneurial bug in them and they don't like being bogged down with the bureaucracy and red tape that a lot
Yep.
of denominations or associations can have. So they create a founding board that is unique to them and just like you said, doesn't work necessarily for sustainable long-term health as you grow. So nothing wrong with it, just a different setup for a different season.
Yep.
Which is actually oh wait, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Well, I was thinking one other thing, like often another description of a founding board or characteristic would be they don't often have a lot of things written down because they didn't need to because they've made it up as they go. They didn't need to be taught because it was caught, and they've been around for a long time, so they just kind of know. And then a founding board with the next pastor, if that doesn't change, often they can go from really not having much involvement at all, and then suddenly they're like, "Wait a second, we have a 38-year-old coming into this room now who's our senior pastor," and they can go all the way down into managing and think that they need to have their hands, and that can just handcuff the next pastor because they didn't really clarify what their job was as a board, so they kind of change who they are as a board for the next leader, and that can just lead to problems.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's actually a really great segue to that first shift that we wanted to talk about, which is from relational authority to role authority. And we kind of touched on that, but like the fact that the founder has brought alongside his or her buddies to kind of help form that initial board. So there's super high, typically high trust, high relationship. They've walked through many seasons of life together. And maybe even that pastor has like you know, baptized them and their kids or married them. Like lots and lots of relational authority, but we've got to make that shift to role authority. So what exactly does that shift look like, Tim, as we go to role authority?
That's super important because you think the founding pastor has, to use a Maxwell example, has lots and lots of trust chips in the pockets of the people around him. Like they've just built this. They probably haven't messed up. They made it all the way to the end of their career. Not that they didn't make mistakes, but they've done it with integrity and they built a ton of trust. And then you have someone new, even if that new person has been on staff for 10 years and is stepping into a new role as lead pastor, still they just don't have near as much trust. They haven't led board meetings. They haven't had to raise money. I mean, there's a lot of stuff they just haven't done yet. So and that's where it's like, okay, then what is the job? And that's the time, or I actually think before the founding pastor leaves, that's the time to kind of begin to define what some of these roles are, to have very clear terms and rotations. And we're not prescriptive on that as far as it has to be 3 years or has to be a year off, those kinds of things. We do think terms are important, and you can have them be contiguous if you want. And there's good reasons, there's pros and cons to that. But to have rotations where you have the ability to bring on new leaders into that room and you have ability to remove leaders from that room when their time is up. I think defined decision rights. We just worked with a church and built out a very robust decision right matrix that has they have two boards, and they have a board of directors and a board of elders, and then the lead pastor. And it very clearly describes who's making the decision, who needs to be consulted, who has no role in that specific thing. And that's important to just put down so we're all clear, especially when you have a new pastor coming on.
Yes.
Annual evaluation rhythms, we're going to talk about that more here in a future next point, but annual evaluation rhythms, both for the board itself, like how do we know we're actually operating how we should be as a board? Let's every year, let's evaluate ourselves.
I think each of these shifts that we're going to talk about, and when we're talking about boards in general, I think that it's so important to recognize that it is about really making sure that everybody has shared expectations. Like I've heard a quote, I don't know who said it, but the disappointment happens when we have missed expectations.
Yeah.
And sometimes a lot of us will hear, myself included, as an entrepreneurial person, I hear things like governance and roles and writing it down and agenda. It can feel like you're being put in a box. But really, this is about, I think about it as like a sandbox. Like what sandbox are we playing in? And let's make sure that we are all in the right sandbox and what our roles look like within that, so that we can pivot and change and move things forward. Um, and so that's kind of how if anybody's feeling like, oh my gosh, this feels so structured and bureaucratic, it's really about making sure that we're all on the same page so that we don't get disappointed or erode that trust, like you said. Yeah.
And the expectations are, they're not wrong. They're just different if we don't actually define it really well.
Yeah.
I talked to a pastor, or to a board chair who was going through the process of, we were going through the process with them of moving from a managing board to a governing board. And the board chair was talking about how they would just come out of their lead pastor evaluation. He said to me, I was told when I came into this role as the chair that one of my jobs in evaluating the pastor is make sure that he preaches 36 times a year in the pulpit. And I'm like, so you guys could be like growing like crazy, introducing people to Christ, lots of baptisms, people in small groups, giving is up, and he preaches 35 times and he didn't fulfill his expectations. And he said, that's what I was told. And so like that's what he thought his job was as a board chair, make sure he preaches 36 times.
Yeah.
So we all come in with expectation. If it's not like defined for us, we're going to define it based on what someone told us, or we used to be on a library board or a school board, and like this is what we think we do as a board member. So that's why it's important to put it down.
So true. Communication is everything. Yes.
Right.
Okay. We're going to talk about our second shift. You mentioned this just a second ago, but from informal accountability to formal evaluation. That's actually kind of interesting. The example that you just gave, I feel like, is such an example of, when we talked about this on a previous podcast, of a managing board, of like being super hyper focused on this one number 36 times a year. That can be an example of like not informal accountability, but like accountability on the wrong things,
Yeah.
rather than formal evaluation of the most important pieces of what it looks like for the senior pastor to lead the church. So talk to us more about what that shift looks like from informal accountability to formal evaluation.
Most founding pastors that we talk to have never had an evaluation
Mhm.
formally. Sometimes they got their hand slapped for doing something that they shouldn't have done, but more often than not, just no one, it's just, again, there's a ton of trust. No one's asking questions. And that can work. I just think it gets problematic for, especially with a second generation or beyond pastor who you've called to the church. This person didn't start the church. You've called them to the church, and now they're in this role. And like, how do I know I'm doing a good job? Most of us want to know that. We want to know if we're doing a good job. A lot of us don't. I mean, many of us don't need like constant feedback, but occasionally, okay, I'm doing the right thing. So what does that look like? When we work with churches, we work on, and we talked about this in our board webinar, or our board masterclass, Healthy Board Masterclass. We talk about writing down very clearly your ends, or sometimes call them outcomes. How do we define the end zone? How do we know as a church that we're winning? And then at the end of the day, at the simplest version of it, the evaluation of the lead pastor is, how well are you leading our church to get us into the end zone, to get us to the thing we have defined as success, we've defined as our outcomes, as the thing that we exist to accomplish. How well are you as our pastor leading us towards that? And you just have a conversation every year about that. And it doesn't need to be critical. I think formal is helpful, as far formal meaning you have a system. And you use that same system every year, tweak it if you need to, but instead of just, we'll tell you if we see something. What that does for the pastors, it protects the pastor too, because otherwise, I've been in board meetings, board rooms, board evaluations, where the evaluation ends up being, I didn't like that one sermon you preached in 1 Thessalonians last year, or you let our worship team do that one song that I don't think has scriptural integrity, or whatever it is. It's like,
The music's too loud.
uh, or the volume's too loud, or you canceled a Saturday service without talking to us. So it's like all over the board, versus like we very clearly define what the expectations are. The pastor knows how he or she's going to be evaluated. And then that evaluation systematically happens at the same time every year. And so you kind of know what to expect. And we have systems that we can help churches with, as far as like There's certain ways to not do it that we've just found are going to cause more tension than is necessary. Even if you have something relatively weighty to bring up, there are just ways to get at it where it becomes a conversation and not a critique.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think depending on our own experiences with evaluations in our own work life or whatever that's looked like for us, the word evaluation can have such a negative connotation and come with so much baggage. But I've actually heard, especially from, in my experience, millennial senior leaders, like senior, I'm thinking of the one particular senior pastor that I have been working with who followed a founder. And he's like, I just don't get any nobody pushes back on me. I don't get any feedback. And I desire, I desire feedback. I want to be evaluated because I want to know how I can improve and be developed. So I guess what I'm saying is like, don't just assume that this is going to be some scary, daunting thing for your senior leader. In my experience, many, especially a healthy leader, yearns for regular, consistent feedback and evaluations so that they can know that they're meeting expectations, you know?
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Last but not least is the third shift that we wanted to talk about today, from personality driven unity to covenant driven unity. From personality driven unity to covenant driven unity. And of course, this one makes sense because many times our founder lead pastors, they have strong and charismatic personalities,
Yep.
which may or may not be the case for whoever succeeds them. So, yeah, talk to us about that shift from personality driven to covenant driven.
Yeah. The common thing about a founding pastor is as long as they are there till their last day, there's something about them that galvanized every single person in that church to be part of that church, likely. Maybe the larger the church, maybe my small group was my first step in or my Sunday school class, but ultimately people choose it and stick because there's something about that founding pastor that pulled them in. And that's maybe their galvanizing charismatic personality, it may be their preaching, it may be something, but as you go to a second, third, fourth generation pastor, that's no longer true. People are gonna be like, yeah, I came when Pastor Smith was here, and then Pastor Jeremy was here for a while, and now I've got this new. And so it's not necessarily always going to. It's not going to be true anymore. The glue that pulls us together and keeps us together, and specifically in a board, often is that founding personality. And then with that next generation, you begin to realize, okay, this isn't forever. This second pastor, they're actually an interim pastor. Maybe they'll stay for 25 years like the last guy did, but more than likely not. So they're here for 5 or 15 years, and then we're going to have a third. So it really needs to shift from the personality of the leader into writing things down and having our unity comes around the things that we covenant around. So we work with boards and we encourage boards to have written board covenants about how we're going to do life together, about the qualifications of what it even means to be in this room and to be leading at this level, agreeing on how conflict is going to be handled, agreeing on how we're going to communicate, how often we're going to meet. We talked recently about the board hats. When are we wearing our board hat and when are we not wearing our board hat? And what does that look like? We're kind of, working together and having this covenant together. And you've talked before about how, in relation to culture, how culture, in the early days is caught and then it needs to be taught because it's just either the place is too big or we just have too many, we just really need to decide together who we are. And I think this is true as well for a board. The unity around the board maybe was natural, it was just always there. And now it's like, no, we actually need to make it intentional. We need to actually codify it a bit, not just assume it's going to be there.
Yes, exactly. So good. Okay. I'm going to do a quick recap for us. So, the first shift that we talked about today was from relational authority to role authority. Then we talked about the shift from informal accountability to formal evaluation. And then last but not least, we talked about from personality driven unity to covenant driven unity. And so these are just 3 shifts that we recognize that many founding boards need to make in order to be a healthy governing church board. And Tim and I have actually created, I think this is our first time to talk about this on the podcast, which is exciting, an assessment. It's a free assessment that you can take. We spent several months working on this. That basically what we would love for you to do, you can take it on your own first, but I think it'd be really cool for the different members of your board to take it individually and then compare your results. That's leaning into some vulnerability.
Yeah, that's where the magic happens though, when you can talk about it.
Exactly. And so I can't remember how many questions it is, Tim. I don't know if you remember. Maybe it's like, I don't know, 20 to 30 or so.
I think
Anyway,
it's 32.
32. Of course, you know, 32 to be exact.
I think it's 8 categories, and there's 4 questions around each category.
Math. Love that.
Yep.
But anyway, it should only take you like 5 minutes or so to answer the questions. And then we're going to give you a score, a health score. You can kind of rate like green, yellow, orange, red to see where your board is based on your answers on church health. And it's free. And then you'll get an email from me with your results and you can set up a time to talk through it. But you can actually go to healthychurchboard.com. healthychurchboard.com. You can take that free assessment right there. And then we have mentioned this on the podcast. We've kind of been dripping it out, but our Healthy Church Board Masterclass. This is our digital masterclass, 11 video lessons with a comprehensive workbook. That is also available for pre-order through September 1st. So if you're not quite ready to take the leap there, go take the free assessment, and then you can explore the masterclass at healthychurchboard.com. And we are just so excited to bring this resource because, again, Tim and I work with so many different church boards across the country. But we know we won't be able to help all of you. We wish we could, but we won't be able to help all of you. And so this is our way to feel like we are helping you make those shifts towards a healthy board, because a healthy board makes a healthy church. Right, Tim?
That's right. And Holly, I think this is true. And if not, we'll clip this out. But I think we have a discount code. If they pre-order it by September 1st, September 1st is when it releases. So you can go to the page, you can look at it, you can kind of see what it is, but it doesn't actually release until September 1st. And if you order it between now and then and use the discount code that Holly's about to tell you, then you get I think it's a $500 discount. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. Yes. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah, it's the discount code is BOARD podcast, BOARD podcast. And yeah, you get I think that makes it what, $9.95 or nine. Yeah. Anyway, it's $14.95 normal price, so you get $500 off. So yeah, that's specifically for if you pre-order it by September 1st. And if you have any questions about any of this, you know where to find us. Tim at LeadingSmart.com, Holly at LeadingSmart.com, and we'll be happy to answer your questions if we've confused you at all today. But healthychurchboard.com is where you can find all that information as well. All right, Tim. Well, I will see you in Chicago later today, and can't wait to be able to tell everybody about the Global Leadership Summit.
That'll be great. See you in a bit and see you all next week.
Bye, everybody. Well, we at Leading Smart are so excited to announce the Healthy Church Board Masterclass. We believe that a healthy church board changes everything. So we've created this masterclass for church boards of all shapes and sizes, locations, theology, wherever you find yourself. If you are on a church board, this masterclass is for you. Tim, why are we doing this masterclass?
We've been talking about this for months, maybe a couple of years, because we have a heart for pastors and a heart for healthy churches. And we see too often when a healthy pastor and a healthy church are driven apart from each other because of an unhealthy board or an unhealthy board relationship. And so we just think that health from that level, it filters down into the entire church, filters down into the staff, and it just gives that church a chance to thrive. And that's what we want. We want to see thriving churches. And so we do this every week with churches across the country, but we realize we can't get to every church. And so we wanted to make this as scalable and as accessible as we possibly could.
It comes with 9 video lessons, and every single lesson is accompanied by a tool, reflection questions, transcripts from the lesson, and we even have a bonus video, which is about 20 of our frequently asked questions around what does it look like to build a healthy church board. So our invitation is to invest in yourself as a board member, invest in your board, and ultimately your church and your community, because a healthy church board impacts the healthy kingdom that we're all working together to build. So go to leadingsmart.com where you can learn more and purchase the Healthy Church Board Masterclass.